encouragement where I inspire women to think like the woman in Proverbs 31, spiritually, financially, and also relationally. So today I'm going to be talking about whether or not it's okay for a single person to give relationship and marriage advice. And, some people might hear that and say, you know what, I'm okay with a single person giving relationship advice. But when it comes to marriage advice, that's where I draw the line. Then you have some people that don't want to hear from a single person at all. And I wanted to address this topic because I am a single person who gives relationship advice. And one of the biggest arguments that I've heard and that I've read online from looking at different comments and things like that. I'm in different groups on Facebook and we've had this conversation and things like that. And one of the most common arguments I've heard is, well, if he or she knows so much, why are they still single? Do they take their own relationship advice as to imply that something is wrong with that person because he or she is not married? And, it also implies that because a person is married that they're an expert, right? So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to address this topic. I was looking at a video on Facebook, somebody that I follow. He's a married man. He gives a lot of relationship advice and I respect him. And I do listen to a lot of his advice and I tend to agree with most of it. Some of it, that saying, take the meat but spit out the bones. And that's with anything, not everybody's going to say 100% of, everything we agree with, right? So he's one of those type of people. But anyway, I follow his channel a lot, and one of his videos, he made the statement that a matchmaker or relationship coach cannot be single. Like he said, like, what sense does that make? And coming from him, I was actually surprised because he's been giving advice since he was single. He's married now, but he's been giving advice since he was single. So I was actually surprised that he felt that way, but there are a lot of people who feel that way. There are some married people who feel that single people have nothing to say to them because they can't relate, which is true. If a single person has never married, they can't relate to being married if they've never been there. And they feel like that they don't care, like they would never. And I've seen it. I've had those conversations like, I don't care. There's nothing a single person can tell me, right? And let me just say that we are all entitled to our opinions. We're all entitled to our feelings, our preferences, and things like that. And I absolutely understand when it comes to wanting to talk to somebody who can relate to where you are. For an example, I have a teenage daughter, and sometimes I just want to hear from someone who not only has children, but who has teenage daughters or grown daughters, because I know that they were either once where I am right now or they're here right now. So sometimes I just want to talk to other mothers who have daughters or, who have daughters that are currently teenagers and, grown daughters, because sometimes I want to know, what are some of the things that you do with your daughter or for your daughter, and what are some of the things that you did? So I completely relate to that. And see, this is why it's so important to know, when someone is looking for advice, because we all need advice sometimes, right? And it's important to know, am I looking for advice from somebody who is where I need to know? I just want to know like what they did, or am I looking for some sound, unbiased advice with no personal feelings mixed in, based on research, rooted in statistics. I can never say that word, rooted in statistics. That's when I want to go to the experts, right? That's when I go looking online for, people who specialize in helping children and teenagers, right? Or young women. And to me, it doesn't matter whether they have a child or not. I like to liken it to thinking about a pediatrician, right? A pediatrician is a doctor who went to school, he or she went to school, they received the necessary education and training to be able to treat children, right? We take our children to pediatricians for a physical. When they're sick, have a fever, we reach out to them to find out what we should do. If they're having behavior issues, we call that doctor. And we don't really wonder, oh, do they have children? Because we trust their training, we trust their expertise. And it's the same thing when it comes to a relationship or marriage counselor or relationship or marriage coach or therapist. Many of them have received the necessary training and expertise to do what they do, right? To give the advice that they give. One important thing to keep in mind, when we're looking to people who are in our situation, is that sometimes we have to be mindful that they're speaking from experience, so emotions get involved, right? And sometimes when emotions get involved, people, they tend to give advice based on what I would do, or this is what I would do if I was you, or this is what I did, and sometimes a person can be giving us advice and gets triggered from what you're going through. It triggers what they've been through, and so all of the advice is emotional, so we have to keep that in mind too. And that's why I mentioned, really think about whether you want some sound advice, non-biased, meaning that there's no personal feelings involved and it's based on the facts, right? Because, like I said, I like to talk to people who relate to where I am as a mother, but then sometimes I just want non-biased, unemotional advice, and I want facts, right? I don't need any emotions involved. And also, sometimes a person giving you advice, if they are emotionally tied to you, a lot of times they tend to lean more towards you being on your side. You know what I mean? They're more towards, your well-being, and and you are sometimes already right. In their mind, you already right. You come to them and they're already biased and on your side. Whereas when you have somebody, who doesn't know you, who's neutral, maybe a professional, they're not going to just automatically take your side. Their biggest, their client is the relationship, not you, and that's one of the things I learned when I became a relationship and marriage facilitator, is that our client is not the man, our client is not the woman, our client is the relationship. And so this is one of the things that we learn. And also, as a medical professional, one of the first things that I learned, and also being a teacher now, one of the first things that I have to teach my students is to remove your own personal bias. Your own personal bias. That means that whatever your personal feelings are about this, you have to take that out of the equation. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest arguments is that, something has to be wrong with that single marriage or relationship therapist or coach if he or she is still single. Like, something is wrong. Like, I'm not listening to him or her because they're still single. Something is wrong with that. Now, let's be real. We know there's some people out here that just give advice and don't follow any of it, right? They're jacked up in their personal lives, and meanwhile, they can tell everybody else what to do. So, there's some people like that. However, there are some of us out here, and I say us because I'm included in that. I'm a single person. I'm not perfect. However, I love relationships. These are relationships is something that I've studied over the years. When I got on my journey years ago of my journey to becoming a woman of God, and I started studying biblical womanhood. Another thing that I began studying was biblical marriages and relationship and things like that. And so I've always been into relationships. I love love. I love psychology. Didn't finish my degree in psychology. It's something I plan on doing later. But let me just mention Stefan Speaks. So he's a relationship, very well known. You probably heard of him, Stefan Labussiere, but he gives a lot of marriage and relationship advice. He's a single man, and I saw somebody in his comments say, well, I'll start listening to him once he's married. And I'm going to address that in a minute, how we assume that married people are experts. But anyway, one thing that some people don't realize is that the more you grow and the more you better yourself, it is harder to find somebody who aligns with your life and your life's purpose and where you see your life going, right? Years ago, I made up this quote, the more I grow, the higher my standards go. And I'll say that one more time. The more I grow, the higher my standards go. And I say that because the more work that I've done on myself, the more that I've healed from past experiences and things like that. And I actually recorded a video on the importance of healing. I don't know if I'm going to end up posting that before this one or after. So if it's already posted, make sure you check that out. If not, just look out for that one coming up. But I talked about the importance of healing before getting into a relationship. And this is one of the reasons why, because once you got into a place that you recognize areas that you need to heal, you stop wanting people who are still, blaming everything on everybody else. You start looking for people who have, begun doing the necessary work on themselves, so it's not easier. I look at somebody like Stefan, right? Stefan Speaks, and he has, like he said in the video when he addressed that comment, somebody like him has access to thousands of women, right? And just because he has access to a lot of women does not mean that he's meeting women that are right for him, right? And I've talked to other single men, attractive men, who have told me that quantity does not always equal quality. So yeah, I meet a lot of women, but I have not met the right woman, so and the same for myself. I don't have access to thousands of men or anything like that. However, I do meet men, and it's just, I have not met that person for me yet, because first of all, it's easier to kind of weed out the ones that I don't want. And I often like to say, many of us single people, if we just wanted to be married, I could have been married years ago. If I just wanted to be in a relationship, I could be in a relationship, but I don't want to be in a relationship with just anybody. And that's one of the things that healing does for you, because, you get to a point where you would rather be alone than to be with the wrong person. So I just kind of wanted to mention that, when you see these single relationship and marriage coaches out here, don't always assume that there's something, and it could be something wrong. There's something wrong with all of us. Let me just say that. But don't automatically assume that there's something that they're just not doing right, or their relationship advice is not good because they're still single. Now let's talk about how many of us automatically assume that married people are experts just because they're married, right? So first of all, one of the things we need to look at when we're talking to, and I think we should all, single people, I think we should all have married friends that we can go to for advice, and couples that we look up to. And one of the things that we got to ask ourselves, first of all, they're married, but are they happily married, right? And beyond being happily married, is their happy marriage a healthy marriage, right? Because two people can be in an open relationship and have a happy marriage, right? Because they're happy with the way things are. I knew a married couple who were both addicted to drugs. They were happy, but they weren't in a healthy marriage. So it's important to also look at that as well. So not everybody that is married is in a happy marriage, and not everybody in a happy marriage is in a healthy marriage. So when I look at married couples that I want to talk to and glean from, I look at the fruit of their marriage, right? I look at, are these the type of people that I would want to be like? Not that every relationship is the same, and we should never covet or want to be exactly like people, but let's be real, there are people who inspire us, whether they're single or married, right? And I do have a married friend that I go to for advice, and I call her my wifey goes. And I call her my wifey goes because I watch how she is with her husband, and she is exactly who I just naturally am. The way she is with her husband, like, I know that I'm going to be like that with my husband, because we have the same values, and we have the same, outlook on what we think a wife should be to their husband. So she's someone that I glean from. She's someone that I talk to and get advice from. And again, if a person is married and they prefer to only talk to other married people, that is perfectly okay. That is, and again, I get it. I understand, because sometimes we just want to talk to people who are where we are, who can relate to the day in and day out. I've never been married, so I cannot relate to the day in and day out of marriage. I won't know until I get there, right? But I have a married friend who actually, she's been calling me her marriage counselor for years. And this is because she and I, we used to work together, and we got real close. She actually put me on to, this was back in 2013, she put me on to Focus on the Family and Family Life Today. There are two Christian programs. They talk a lot about parenting, and they talk a lot about marriage, right? And those programs literally changed my life as a mother to my daughter, and also in preparing me for, as preparing me as a single, and also preparing me for when that day comes when I get married, if it's in God's will for me, right? So when she began talking to me, I literally was just regurgitating to her things that I had learned, right? She said I gave her the best advice because some of the people she was talking to was married, and it was more so coming from a, no girl, he need to do this, he need to do that, you know, because, and not to go too deep into her business, she just wanted him to, there were some things that she wanted him to change. And you know, there's this thing that they say, you know, be the change that you want to see, right? And so that was simply the advice in a nutshell. I just reminded her to, you know, this is what you want to see. Okay, so you do this, you do that. It wasn't anything personal. She doesn't get personal. She doesn't tell me their personal and sexual business or anything like that. However, she trusted me enough to know that I wouldn't judge her husband. Like when I see him, I don't, you know, because some people you talk to, they will, you know, you talk to your family or friends and then they judge them. And then once you've forgiven your husband or your significant other, they haven't forgiven them because they remember everything you told them. But she knew that I wouldn't be like that. She knew that I was unbiased. I wasn't just on her side, right? I was coming from everything that I had been learning over the years from these programs that she put me on to, you know. So anyway, her husband is not perfect. However, things have gotten a lot better. He did a whole 180, you know, just things that she thanked me for as a single person, as she said nobody else could give her, you know. So I thank God for using me in that way. And I'll say this, I've had 3 people, she was one of them, tell me that I reminded them of certain relationship experts. Now, 2 of them I had heard of. 2 of them are males. And then another one was a woman I had never heard of. And when my friend told me about her, she sent me a clip with it. And she said, you remind me so much of her. And when I watched the clip, I was so taken aback and I was so honored that she would even think that I reminded her of this woman. But that was just kind of, you know, God just confirming for me that he was using me in this way that I didn't think. And I still sometimes struggle with inadequacy. I'll be honest about that. But he used 3 different people from 3 walks of life that I know in 3 different ways. 2 of them are married. He used them to let me know, like, this is what people are seeing in you. And this is what people, this is how I'm using you in their lives, you know. So I just say that to say that God can use anybody. Let's just take it a step further and look at Paul, who was a single apostle. He wrote the majority of the New Testament, including Ephesians and Corinthians, which contain some of the most popular scriptures on marriage that we, you know, read, recite, and quote today, right? And apply to our lives today. So let's just keep that in mind. And again, like I said, everybody's entitled to their opinions, their feelings, and their preferences. But to say that a person is unqualified simply because they're not married, and to automatically qualify a person simply because they're married, you know, I was just kind of hoping that this video would maybe give a different perspective to those people. There's going to be some people that just still like, I don't care. This is just me. And I get it. Trust me. I understand that when you want to talk to somebody who is in your shoes. But then when you want some real unbiased, sound advice, based on research, based on statistics, you know, keep in mind that there are people who study relationships and marriage for a living. You know, there are people whose lives revolve around helping people thrive in their marriage and relationships. Years ago, my daughter, I think she was about 10, and I, you know, was kind of reluctant on hearing some advice that one of my friends said she wanted to give me. She didn't have any kids, and I'll be honest, I was one of those people, you know, you don't have kids, you don't relate. But I'm so glad that I listened to what she had to say to me, because that has been the most important piece of advice that I've ever heard. And she simply came from the Word of God. When you are getting advice that's coming straight from God's heart, there, you can't go wrong with that. She just simply reminded me that we have a real enemy out here, and that enemy has been after you all your life, and that enemy is now after your daughter. And she reminded me that I had to pray and that I have to fast for my daughter. And that is more important than any piece of advice that I've ever gotten, because every piece of advice that I was getting was practical. Which, yes, sometimes we just need practical advice. However, that practical meant nothing if in the spiritual world there's a war going on that I cannot fight with carnal weapons, right? I need to fight spiritually. We know that the Bible says that, you know, we don't fight against the natural world. We fight against, you know, the things in heavenly places and principalities and things that we can't see, right? We're not fighting against flesh and blood. So with her giving me that advice, that was the most important thing that I needed to hear. God knew exactly what I needed to hear when I needed to hear it. And if I wasn't open to hear from this person who did not have kids at the time, she's actually married now and she has a child now. But if I wasn't open to receive what she had to say to me, you know, I would have never gotten that piece of advice that was most important, that was bigger than anything, because nothing else mattered, because there was a spiritual war. There is a spiritual war going on that I have to constantly fight spiritually. I'll also say this: whether you are getting advice from a single person or a married person or whoever, it is important to, first of all, don't let that replace the counsel from the Holy Spirit. Don't let that replace going to God in prayer, right? Don't, you know, take what people say as the end all and be all. You know, go to God, you know, pray about who you should talk to, because he uses people to speak to us, like I just gave an example of. You know, so I'm not going to say that we shouldn't go to people. I'm not going to negate the importance of going to people. However, I do know that the most important person that we should be going to is God. So, you know, and when you do, you know, just think and pray about who you should go to, because many of us, we run to people, you know, we run to different people and we get different things. So we need to be careful about who we're getting our advice from anyway. If you hung in here to the end, thank you for hanging in there with me. Thank you for watching my video. If you want to hear more from me, please consider subscribing, like this video. If you enjoyed it, I would like to hear from you. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? You know, what has been your experience? You know, do you find yourself leaning more towards someone who can relate, or do you want more of an expert advice? And I just want to hear from you. Let me know. And if you have any prayer requests, any video suggestions or questions, feel free to email me. I'll leave that down below. Thank you again for visiting my channel. Be blessed.